And there she is. There's our little doll now. A 2005 Saturn Relay, which is the same genre for the Uplander, the Terraza, the Montana from Pontiac. I'm Paul Velton, by the way. And in this video, I'm going to be parlaying for you how to do a engine change on this bad boy. The engine has to come out with the cradle underneath the car. It's a little bit different from the process of what we might be used to. Pulling an engine out from the top, pulling the mounts loose. You don't need to do that here. You're going to leave the mounts in play. You're also going to leave the axles in, unless you're going to do an engine change when you get the cradle out. It'd be good to at least break those axle nuts loose before you lift the car. You're going to break the lug nuts loose anyway. So you might as well take the axle nuts off while you're at it. So first step is you're going to pull the hood. You can see down in the corner here has small eyelets that retain the hood brackets. To get the hood off, you have to sort of close the hood with the hinge unmounted, and then you can kind of wiggle it out of there and get it out. Here I'm removing the attachment bolts for each of the engine mounts that mount to that upper core support. So there's 4 on each side, then you got a couple dog bones to the engine. And the common practice is to remove these 4 bolts and then just swing the brackets up out of the way. I removed this mount completely because of the nature of, there's a retaining bracket for the wiring loom that you see just in front of my left hand there. Just taking the whole thing out makes it a little bit easier to work with because there's a lot of wiring connections that have to be dealt with in order to drop the engine. Now this is not going to be a bolt by bolt disassembly. This is more of, hey, here are the steps so you have a good idea what's going on. Ideally you do this on a lift. I don't have a lift. I'm doing this on the ground. So the procedures that I'm going to give you are as though you're going to be doing it on the ground. Different people can handle these disassemblies in different ways. I choose to remove a lot of the components in order to make things easier and less likely that I'm going to break anything. So because of that, I choose to remove the air cleaner box. I remove the boot at the throttle body and then unsnap the 2 snaps that go to the air cleaner box and then pull that out. There's a hose that goes to it, but you can pull that free. And that pulls the mass airflow sensor out with it. And then you can pull the air box out. It's right behind it. There's 3 10mm head screws that are in the base of that black box at the base of the screen. You can pull that out. Then on the other side of the car, I take the battery out. It's going to be a 13mm bolt behind the battery. There's a plastic wedge that holds the battery in. There's also 2 support bars diagonal on either side, and those are 13mm bolts, headed bolts. You can take those out. There's 2 bolts on the upper core support and 1 up at the firewall area. Then on the passenger side, there's a relay box. You can see there, fuse block. You take off the cover, and up against the inner fender there are 2 10mm nuts that you can buzz out of there. Then once those nuts are out, you can just lift that box up in order to get to the washer bottle that's just behind it. And there's 3 10mm head screws that hold that in, along with 2 electrical connectors and 2 lines that go off. One's for the rear wiper assembly, one's for the front. Once that's out of the way, it's easier to get to the serpentine belt, 3/8 drive ratchet down on the adjuster. It's just under the dashboard area in the back there. You'll see there's a notch punched out in the tensioner. You just stick the ratchet in there, turn it counterclockwise, and that'll take the tension off the belt. Then you can pull the belt out. There's a decal on that side of the engine that shows you what the belt routing is. And the reason you're going to do that is because you need to get the AC compressor disconnected, because you don't want to drop that. You want to leave the AC system in there, and you do not have to break the AC system. You'll see right here I'm working on removing the front shroud and radiator. This is to make it easier for me to get to the electrical connections at the front of the car. There's quite a few down there. This will make it much easier for me to get to them, and much less likely that I'm going to damage anything as I'm removing the cradle assembly. Again, there's different ways you can approach this. You don't have to take all these things off. You might be able to squeeze everything out just fine. This is the process I choose to take. I take out the fan shroud and I take out the radiator. So there's two 10 millimeter headed screws that point forward. So you get the heads from the back of the core support on either side. You can see the top mounts there on the right and the left of the radiator. And so I buzz those out and then take the mounts off. Then you have to take your hoses loose, and they're using spring clips on those. Then there's one electrical connector. It's pretty easy to get to, right in the center there, to disconnect for the fans. And then there are two other screws on the wings of the shroud that hold it in. They're 10 millimeter heads as well. So once you disconnected that, now this is the hose that goes up to the radiator neck for the overflow, and it's difficult to get the shroud out unless you take that hose off. So it's easier just to go ahead and remove that hose from the radiator. Now the upper hose and the lower hose you can leave on the radiator. I just disconnect them at the engine. There's no screws at the bottom. It does kind of slide into a couple of fingers, a finger on either side. They're like a slot. It's like a slot. It's a tongue and groove slot. So you just kind of pull up on it. It slides out of those slots, and then you can just pull the fan assembly right out. Now it comes time to remove the radiator. Now the radiator, you have to remove both of the lines for the automatic transmission. There's two black caps, one on each end where they attach to the radiator. You can just push those out of the way with a pry bar or screwdriver. They'll slide right down the tube, exposing the release spring. Now some guys will use a release tool. I like to use just a Harbor Freight a fake dental tool, a pick, a flat tip screwdriver. The spring clips are pretty easy to get to, either from underneath or up above, depending on which one you're working on. You can just slide them right out, and then you can just take a pry bar and pry up against the shroud while the shroud's still there, and just pop it right out of the radiator. And then the radiator sits down into a tongue and groove on the AC condenser, so you have to separate those, and that comes by lifting the condenser. So I'm grabbing the condenser and lifting it up out of that tongue and groove, so that when I grab the radiator, I can now lift it up and get it out of there. The one on the driver's side always seems to just be automatically released, but the one on the passenger side is the one you got to kind of fight with a little bit. Again, this is just about reaching in there, lifting the condenser up a little bit, and pushing down on the radiator a little bit, and then you'll be able to swing that radiator backwards just enough to clear. And now we can, with the transmission lines disconnected, upper and lower hose disconnected, we can slide the radiator out of there. And you'll notice there the petcock is on the driver's side, and it's pretty easily accessible from underneath the car. Now with the radiator out of the way and the shroud, all of the wiring that's at the forward part of the engine is much, much easier to deal with. So what you have here is, this is a connection that's up at the throttle body, this gray gang connector, and it has a plunger on the top, and all you really have to do is put a screwdriver in there and lift up on it, and that will release the lock and actually pries it away a little bit too, so you can pull that connector out. There's a connector that's down on the top of the transmission. It's very easy to see at this point with all those things removed, and it's just out of frame, but it is just a squeeze connector. So by squeezing on the side, you can pull it back, and here I just use some channel locks to just get a good grip on it and pull it back, and course, if you're gentle, you won't break anything. Here I'm using a screwdriver to remove some of the loom locks that are in place. Here's a pry bar doing the same thing. This is going down the back of the bottom of the transmission, the side of the transmission. What you're trying to do at this point is just follow the looms on. There's one at the back and one at the front of the engine here that go to the left, that go to the passenger side, and you're just trying to follow those and release all of these retention locks, rings, straps, while disconnecting any pigtails that are coming off of this loom. Now there's two towards the front of the car that are just ground areas down on the transmission. So studs that are coming out of the transmission, they have nuts on them. They're around the 13 to 15 millimeter head. So you're going to buzz those off to release all those ground wires. The other thing you're going to do is go ahead and disconnect the starter at this time. Again, much easier to get to with all that stuff out of the way. There's going to be two connections there. One's going to be like an 8 millimeter socket head. The other one's, I think, maybe a 1/2 inch to a 13 millimeter, depending on what they decide to use. And that'll disconnect your starter. You can also go ahead and unhook the AC compressor at that time. So you're just going to follow those looms down there and disconnect everything as it comes up to the left side. From there, you're going to progress to the back side up against the firewall. There's several connections that are pretty easy to get to. There are a few. Here's one pictured that's in the back, particularly difficult to see, a little bit difficult to get to. You can see, though, here they have it rotated so that the release tab is on top. The majority of these releases are just to press down, and then it'll pop free and you can push it out. So it's typical pull. You can push it with a screwdriver on the other side, or you can pull on it once you get that release tab depressed. So it's going to be a little stiff, but that's how the majority of them work. As I mentioned earlier, there's one that's a squeeze type, but that's how those are going to work. There's two in the back there that are kind of hiding, but again, as you're sort of tugging on the wiring loom assembly, you'll get an idea of what you need to get disconnected back there. You don't have to do anything with the ignition wires and the coil. You can leave all of that intact. So here I've got it where I've pulled it. I've gotten everything disconnected and I've pulled it out. And these are all idiot proof, meaning you can't plug them into the wrong spot. So once you get them unplugged, it's pretty straightforward getting them plugged back in. Now there's a couple of connectors at the back that are particularly impossible to get to unless you drop the cradle down. But I'm going after one in the back here that's an O2 sensor hookup. And there she is. And that little sweetheart's got a lock in it, as you can see. You got to pull the pin, and then you can release the lock. And that's one of the several gifted connectors that are a pullback. So you don't have to squeeze. It has one of those tabs that sticks out, and it curls out. You just get your finger on it, pull up, and then you can pull it right off. There's several of those on this car too. And then it's got a barbed retainer on it. It sticks into a piece of sheet metal down there, so you'll need to kind of tug it out of there to get it released. And then the alternator has two connections up there, and it takes like a 13 millimeter to get that off. And then just behind that is another connector, which is the feed, not the feed, but the controller. And that one, if you get a flashlight on, it's pretty easy to see. It's a pry up and away from the body, and then it slides upward at an angle towards the firewall. So here you can see I'm just going over, looking at, I've got my my AC lines. I've got my AC compressor that's dismounted. There's 3 bolts that hold that in place. 2 at the top, 1 at the bottom, which is fairly easy to get to. It's a little tight down there. There's an underguard that you can take down. There are 10 millimeter bolts, make it a little bit easier to get to that 3rd bolt that's underneath there, but you can choose to leave it in if you want. Here I'm shining a light down to show you. This is the connection, the hookup for the shifter control. And you see there's 2 bolts just off to the left there that are in the shine. And then just up at the top of the light towards the left, there's one more. And that's the actual selector shaft. So There's the bracket with the 2 bolts, which I believe are 15s. And then I think the one that's on the selector shaft is another 15. This isn't too difficult to get to. You can get to this with a swivel. Here, I'm just going after it with my power driver. And this Milwaukee, by the way, is worth every penny and then some. They should probably charge twice as much. I'd still buy one. They're fantastic. Here I'm shoving a light down here, just trying to show you, because it was so hard to see through the camera to see what I was actually looking at. I mean, I could see it, but again, it's simply just two 15mm headed bolts on a bracket, and then the cable swings down right in front of you there, scooping around the ABS unit, and it goes into that bracket and then onto the bracket where the selector shaft is. And I had to leave the cable attached. I don't mess with that. I'm just pulling the bracket. So here I've taken the nut off the selector shaft. There it is. And I'm just popping that arm off of the selector shaft. Okay, the next thing you have is the 2 heater hoses that are up towards the top. Now, what's holding those on, you'll see there's a black shroud that slides onto 2 pipes, and this is just behind the transmission dipstick tube. Within it are these white retainer rings. The idea there is you squeeze the bottom tangs that stick out, and that releases them so that you can pull the hoses off of the pipes. There's 2 of them there. Now we move underneath. So what I'm using here, I've got the car jacked up just a little bit with some mini stands. You can see how tore up the underside of this thing is. It's a mess. That's why it's going to the yard. I'm using a long reach Daytona $189 3-ton floor jack. It's a 24 1/4 inch lift from Harbor Freight. And this is necessary, in my opinion. It's necessary to use something like this to get the car up high enough. And it does it very safely. I'm just using one small block under the rear subframe tie-in. And I've got another floor jack, a smaller one, kind of a standard jack on the other side, that I'm bringing it up with together at the same time. Again, you can do this different ways. In my view, this is a safe way to do it. Then the next thing that I got was $100. You get 2 12-ton floor stands from Harbor Freight. They're very heavy, but they are the tallest that they sell, and they're perfect. Extend them up maybe 4 notches, something like that, and a block of wood, because these subframe rails are pretty soft, especially on this car. They're compromised, so they'll push right through if you're not careful. So get yourself some blocks of wood, and you're going to set that in there to allow to rest the stands on. And you just set it up here right behind the floor jack on the frame rail. So there I have it up about on the 4th notch. That's perfect. So here I'm using this orange truck stand. This is really just for staging while I swap out the jack for the taller floor jack so that we can get it up to use the 12-ton stand. Next, I put a couple more stands, the truck stands, behind the 12-ton stands, really just for safety. This frame rail was rotted out pretty bad. Next, you're going to want to get under there and pull the nuts off of the exhaust collector here. There's one on either side. In this case, they ended up being 13mm. And that'll drop the exhaust pipe down from the exhaust manifold. In this case, the trick that I used was to use a 1/2-inch extension bar with a 1/2-inch socket, 1/2-inch everything, breaker bar, so that I wouldn't have any trouble breaking those nuts loose, but actually they came off pretty easily. Next, in no particular order, I'm going to remove the 2 bolts that hold the steering knuckle to the strut. So that's going to be done for both sides. Also remember, you're going to have to remove the connector for the ABS sensor for each wheel. That wire harness is going to stay in the car. Now for these tighter bolts, remember to use a 6-point socket. No 12-point stuff that could potentially round off the nuts and bolts. In this case, I used the sledge to knock out these bolts. If you're going to keep the bolts, you're not going to buy new ones for any reason. Just maybe leave the nut on the end of the bolt, hammer it all the way out as far as you can go, then spin the nuts off and drive them through with a punch or a drift so that you're not actually hammering on the ends of the bolts, which would round over the threads potentially. Next, we got to remove the sway bar links. And these are a little unusual because they're so tall. In this case, I ended up just cutting them off and installing new ones when I was done. The joint was spinning inside of the socket of the tie rod end, and there was nothing to grab a hold of on the back side with a wrench to steady it, so there was really no way to get them off without just cutting the joint off. And so next we're going to remove the through bolt that holds the steering shaft onto the power steering rack. And here I've already got the boot pulled away. And actually this is a great design. What you have to do is basically lock the steering wheel down, steady it. I used a couple of bungee cords. I just wrapped a bungee around the steering wheel webbing and then under the seat so the steering wheel would stay straight, pointed straight ahead before disconnecting anything. And the reason you do this is because there's a clock spring inside the steering wheel which drives the airbag, and you can't just let the steering wheel spin and spin and spin without messing that up. So you want to point the wheel straight ahead, lock it down, and then you can go in here and find this through bolt to pull the steering shaft loose from the power steering rack. So the way this one is designed, you have a through bolt, which is typical, but the through bolt's pretty easy to get to. And with the through bolt removed, the steering shaft slides up very easily off of the shaft that goes down into the power steering rack. Just has a flat edge. Because there's no spline, it slides off and on of that shaft that goes into the rack very easily, and it's pretty easy to line up. Finally, you're going to remove the two fuel lines that hook up to the top of the engine. This one has a plastic lock on it as a retainer, so you release the lock and you can pull that off. The other one has a spring lock. This is the pressure side, and it fits down on top of a tube. A special tool can be used here to remove that, which slides up into the inside of the coupler to release it. Here we have the tube that's coming off the rail, just demonstrating how that would fit on there. These tools are available at the local auto parts store. A tip for you: whenever you remove fuel lines, make sure you take the gas cap off first and leave it off so that there's no pressure in the tank that might push the fuel out. You're going to have some fuel spillage anyway, so make sure you have some towels ready. Okay, so once you've gotten all your hoses, all of your electrics, the fuel line, all of these things disconnected, you've got exhaust taken care of, you've got your power steering rack disconnected from the steering shaft. Now it's time to go ahead and remove the cradle bolts. Now, the process that I'm using here, I took my Daytona jack and I took one of the wheels and I flipped it upside down so it's face down. I put it underneath the car to act essentially as a trolley jack. If you don't have a trolley jack, you can use essentially the same thing. So now I'm going after one of the 4 carriage bolts that hold that whole front cradle there in place. So here's the thing: if the car is rotted out really bad the way this donor was, you may have to cut into the frame rails to get to the nuts that are on the inside of the frame tube and hold that with a wrench. All you do is just cut the side of the tube out where the nut would be, and then you can put a wrench on it on the inside, and then you can buzz that out of there and then take it to a welder afterwards, and they can weld that box shut again. All right, so you'd be using a cutting wheel for that. But otherwise, you're just going to start by using a socket, and these could be 3/4 inch. You'll just have to play around and see what size you're going to end up using. And I'm using a breaker bar here with a cheater bar to break these loose and spin them out of there. When you set the tire up, if you're going to use that method, just set it a little bit towards the rear of center. it tends to be a little heavy at the back. All right, so now I've got all 4 of the carriage bolts removed, so I'm going to bring in my second floor jack. Now this is really handy to have. This is just for the process of dropping everything down and not losing control of it. So I'm just going to start working this assembly out of there and checking on it occasionally to make sure that I don't have anything still hooked up or catching as it leaves. So there's a lot of wiring that has to be accounted for. There's the hoses for the AC system. There's hoses that are still hooked up to the engine for the power steering system. We got to watch out for the condenser. So there's still several components that you got to clear as you drop this down to make sure that everything's going to be okay. And I'm using a step ladder here to aid in that process. I'm looking down from up above. And yes, by the way, I did this whole thing solo. So my next trick here is I'm going to go ahead and drop the engine down while I'm up on the ladder from up above, just watching it, making sure everything is going to go okay. Now, if you're wondering why I have the drain pan down, I had pulled the axles out ahead of time, and I knew I was going to lose a little bit of fluid from the transmission, so I wanted to make sure I had that covered. Now, here's just a little bit of footage, just to give you an idea of what it looks like from the side as the assembly's coming down. So here again, you can see as the cradle is about halfway out of the van now, you can see some of the wiring that's coming down, some of the other wiring that's staying behind, and these are all things that you want to be very careful of. I'm checking from both underneath and up above as I drop this down. It's very easy in something that's this involved to miss something, number one. Number two, for something to get caught on the way out. So you just want to be careful of that as you're bringing it down. And now I'm at ground zero, and I'm just making sure I don't have anything hooked. I'm pulling up some of the wiring that has dropped down with it. So for this next clip of footage, I've sped things up quite a bit, and here I'm just making sure I've got the exhaust completely freed up from the engine, and I've brought in my second floor jack. So this begins the process of, now I've got to elevate the carriage with everything to get that jack out of there, along with the tire. And the process that I've decided to use here was, you can see I'm using some floor jacks, some floor stands here, so I'm just going to jack this back up from the other side, and through this process I'll be able to remove the center jack. So next, my big secret here that I'm going to reveal to you goes back to the ancient days of how to move big heavy stuff when you don't really have everything that you would need, and that's just using pipes, tubes. So I'm laying down my cheater bar and some copper tubing, some wooden dowel, just whatever I have happen to be laying around. The intent here is to lay the assembly down on top of these, and then I can hook a strap up to it and pull it out from underneath the car. So here I'm putting a tow strap through the cradle and just leaning back, using my body weight to pull it on top of the poles and tubes that I put down. Here I'm going to bring a floor jack in just to take a little bit more weight off of it to help it roll a little bit better. And you get the general idea of what I'm doing here, and it's out. Hallelujah. So with the assembly out of there, this is the perfect time to do a full inspection before you put it into your car. So you're going to look at replacing the spark plugs. You're going to look at replacing the spark plug wires, the thermostat. This is also a good time to replace that alternator. Two other things that you're going to want to do before you put the engine in. The first is you're going to want to replace the intake manifold gasket set. It's very common for them to leak coolant over time, and it's very easy to do with the engine out, but again, much more involved with the engine installed. And finally, the next thing you're going to want to do is replace the high pressure solenoid inside the transmission. Again, this is a pretty simple process with the cradle out on the ground. Pretty challenging to do it with it in the car, although it can be done. There's some YouTube videos that are available if you needed to replace that solenoid after you've got everything installed. One of the benefits of this design is the rubberized gasket does not require replacement, so you can remove this shroud, this cover, and replace the solenoid, which is pretty easy to do, and then clean everything up and reassemble it. Yes, the lower mount here for the transaxle has to be removed, and if it looks like it needs to be replaced, go ahead and replace that now. You'll also need to get fresh fluid for it. Now, it's common that these cooling tubes will leak after they've been used, after they've been taken off and reinstalled, and there really isn't much you can do about that except to replace the hoses. Now, these are a composite hose, so when you replace them, really the best way to do it is to get them directly from the manufacturer. You can get them right from General Motors. They're still available. In fact, it's a rather common part that gets replaced on these cars. Unfortunately, they're about $220 for the set. Now, you can buy just the elbows and fashion in the hoses yourself from Napa, but I chose to go ahead and get the factory set. Now, of course, this is a pretty big job, and there's plenty of details that I left out. I'm assuming that you've worked on cars before. Maybe you've been a tech, and you're really just looking for the steps necessary to perform this job. But if you aren't that familiar with it, one of the things you will have to do is make sure you remember to top off all your fluids when you're done. And you're going to need to bleed some air out of the cooling system, and you can do that from this bleeder screw here on top of the engine with I believe it's an 8mm combination wrench or a socket. Just elevate the front of the van a little bit and get it running. Open up that bleeder screw, and that'll help you bleed out some of the air that's in the cooling system after a job like this. So, yeah, there's some other details that go into this kind of a project. It's not going to be a quick deal. You're not going to get it done in a day. Give yourself plenty of time. If you have somebody help you with it, be very careful that both of you know what the other one is doing, so that there's not confusion if the other one isn't available to help you finish up the project. Well, that's going to do it for us for this episode. Make sure you like and subscribe to my channel if this has been helpful to you at all. I sure appreciate it. It helps me out a lot. It takes a lot of time, and it takes some money to put these videos together, and your subscriptions actually help me recover some of that, so I sure appreciate that. Until next time, we'll see you later. Take it easy.